So today we've got Dalton Kellett on the podcast, current Indycar driver. His dad was actually one of Legendary Motorcar's first customers, so he's been a long-time family friend. I love Dalton's take. He really gives you a good insight into the unique experience that is being an Indycar driver. Enjoy. Man, yeah, good to have you on.
Glad we could do it.
Yeah, you're up. You were just up for media stuff?
Yeah, so we've got the Honda Indy Toronto coming up, and it was pretty last minute, as you know, so many things in racing are. But Green Savory, the promoter, called me up and said, "Hey, can you be in Toronto on Monday to do some interviews and promo shots at the track and all that?" So I was able to jet up here real quick before heading over to Mid Ohio this weekend.
Good. How's the season been going for you?
It's been kind of up and down, to be honest. I think we had a good start. Like St. Pete qualifying was great. Started P14, was running on course for a top 12 finish probably, and then the gearbox blew out. So, well, the gearbox itself physically was fine, but we had a electronic failure on the box that controls the gearbox, which with these cars is kind of more the crux. It's the electronics can be pretty finicky. A couple other small issues like that throughout the year, and then a couple races where I bend it. So
sure,
kind of up and down, but comparing to 2021, definitely happier with the pace and sort of where we are competitively versus the field. It's so tight and so tough right now with the level of competition in IndyCar. It's as good as it's ever been, and whether you're 20th to 15th or 5th to 1st, like it's tooth and nail for every position.
Yeah, I find I don't know. I've got this feeling that like motorsports is getting more and more competitive over maybe it's over the course of all time, but like just recently it's been getting tighter and tighter. Like our last race, we were 1st to 15th was a 10th.
Wow.
And it's like
on a short oval kind of thing,
yeah.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I think you see that across sports in general. It's like everything's just getting so refined these days. Like whether it's rock climbing or track or whatever, like it just as I think humans, and sort of science and athletic science is getting more and more flushed out, and like the mental side of it as well. Like I think we're sort of figuring out like how do we create just better athletes, and whether it's racing or some other sport,
Yeah, no, and equipment too. No,
yep.
I definitely agree. Like all my racing guests, I want to ask you what got you into racing?
Probably you and your brother.
What was the initial conversation though? Because I'm sure you were, you've always, so growing up you had snowmobiles and toys and fun stuff. Were you pushing your parents to let you race or do those things competitively?
Yeah, because so from my perspective, you guys got into karting way before I did, right? Like you were like seven or however old you were, and like we never went to a karting race to like watch you guys, but like I knew that you did it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously we messed around with the skidoos as kids and all that, which was just the home videos are hilarious. But I think it was always something that I was interested in, and like with the ATVs and skidoos, I just love the idea of having my own vehicle, right? I think that's the draw when you're that age, right? It's the freedom of it's your own. You can have your own vehicle and your own kind of control your own little world with your go-kart. So, just always wanted to do it, but I think my parents just knew that based on everything else that I was into, that it would probably like become what it did, right?
Yeah.
So they kind of pushed me to try other sports first and just get different experiences. So I wasn't, just doing the one thing my whole life.
Sure.
And I think there was certainly value to that. Like I, got lots of experience skiing, and then was really into whitewater kayaking for a while.
Oh, right.
So just like, because that was kind of the thing when I was like 14, I want to say, or 13. I had been kayaking for a number of years, and was doing some slalom stuff and the freestyle boating, like the tricks and all that. And there was sort of a point where it was like, okay, I had started karting the summer that I turned 13 or 14, and was kayaking a lot at the same time, and it was sort of this inflection point of like, which way do I go? And I chose karting over kayaking, but it could have gone one of either ways. I'm happy where I ended up, but that was kind of, I think professional whitewater kayaking is a pretty thin sport as far as compensation and whatnot.
It's like a lot of them, but so starting karting at 13 or 14, really, like, how tough was that? Like that was, I'm thinking back on my karting. Like that was probably, I was 14 and then 15 was probably the peak of my karting career.
Right.
Whereas you came in as a complete rookie.
Yeah.
Like that must have been a steep learning curve.
I remember being really like intimidated by, guys like you and the Mateus brothers and all, the Makos brothers and just, the kids that like we raced karts against that had been doing it since they were, 6, 7, 8 years old. So coming in, behind the 8 ball was pretty tough, but, working with Daryl, who you've had on the show for a number of years, he was kind of my first mentor, mechanic in karting, and really we just kind of tried to make up for lost time, and every we like where my parents' places were close to Goodwood Kartways, so
right.
a few nights a week, like we'd be there after I'd be done homework, just bombing around doing laps and laps and laps. And
you and Kevin Monteith.
Yep, exactly. So that was kind of the way to try to make up for the time, but it was definitely it was tough for like a few years. It was, and I think by the time I was sort of done with go-karting, I'd got to the point where I was pretty competitive and like good and where I wanted to be, but it was a hard road to get there for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. What was the I was trying to remember and I didn't have time to look it up. You went out west for karting. What was that?
So what happened there was the ECKC, which is that still around? Or is it
no, I don't think so. But it was the Eastern Karting Championship.
Which was the one in Ontario and Quebec.
Yeah.
And that's the one that I would have done. But my school schedule, being at TFS, the Toronto French School and all that, and being an IB school, like it's the exam. Your final exams aren't just like the school; it's like they're set by. It's like an international sort of external exam, so you can't just move them around.
Sure, yeah.
So they were like, "No, sorry, we can't. Like, you have to be there this week. There's no like missing this exam. We're doing it on a later date." So the Western Canadian Karting Championships didn't conflict with my grade 12 exams or grade 11, whatever year it was. And so I, went out there and did that because I just had to from a school standpoint.
Right. Did you win that championship?
So close. I finished second in like...
Was it to Kyle?
Yeah, it was Kyle, and I think I finished second to Kyle, DD2 maybe, or in senior, because I did DD2 and senior.
Rotax, yeah.
Yeah, and I think me and Kyle were 1 and 2.
Okay. And if you won it, did you get a ticket to the Worlds?
Yeah. And there was a whole bunch, like, this is ancient history and looking back on it doesn't matter now. I remember at the time there was this whole, because to be fair, I think karting in Eastern and like Ontario and Quebec was like really competitive, right? Like not to the Euro level, which I'd gone over and done a couple of those races and just been like blown away by the depth of the fields, right? Yeah. But like closer to that.
But at the pointy end of the field, there's a few guys that can hold their own for sure. In every series,
your Morads and Wickens and all them, like they were all in that scene maybe a few years before me, kind of thing. But like the Western Championship wasn't quite there. There were a couple guys that were world class, but that like for the most part, it was a bit more casual.
Sure.
So I think from their perspective, like there were a couple Eastern guys coming over thinking, this is going to be an easy ticket to the Worlds kind of thing, which wasn't why we went there. It was because I couldn't academically. But they definitely made it tough on us. So there was a bunch of drama with like some of the scrutineering stuff and all that like, I mean, I remember getting Paul Cook involved from the ASN and like looking back on it, it's like didn't matter, but it was a big deal back then.
Going to the Worlds is going to the Worlds.
Yeah, and when you're 16 and that's your whole life, right? Like it matters, but
no, absolutely. So then you jumped to Formula cars, like Formula 1600 or something. What was that jump like? Was that difficult? Was that because some people jump to cars and it's like, oh shit, I was so good at go-karts, this is a whole new thing that I've got to learn. And some people jump to cars and they just keep getting better and better.
Yeah. I think for me, I was probably better in karts at the end of my karting career than I was initially in cars. Like it was a long process to kind of get up to speed there. And I think to be fair, I did well in the Ontario Formula Ford Championship, finished third there, and had some, so did well in the Ontario Formula Ford Championship, but it wasn't as plug and play as like you're winning in karts, you're going to automatically win in cars. Like it's like you said, it's potentially a bit of an adjustment, and that's a great learning tool. I think having an open wheel car without downforce is a good way to learn managing your momentum through the corner and load transfer, and they didn't have like slicks; they were sort of a grooved tire kind of thing. But yeah, it's not as trivial as like if you're good in karts, you're going to necessarily be good in cars.
Right. No. Yeah, there's lots to learn certainly from karts, but cars are a different animal.
I feel
for
like
sure.
karts teach you like racecraft and race situations.
Mm-hmm.
Although, to be fair, when I look at some of the stuff now that goes on, I'm like, I don't know if like 80-mile-an-hour bumper cars is the best training tool for junior open wheel.
Depends what series you're going to.
That's fair.
If you're going to any NASCAR series, it's freaking great training.
Oh, because you just see it like some of the kids that go into the USF 2000, or it's Indy Pro 2000 now. It's USF 2000. Indy Pro is what Star Mazda or Pro Mazda used to be. But like some of the stuff you see of the junior leagues, you're just like, come on, guys. Like,
Yeah.
These things are delicate. You can't be banging wheels as much like as
Yeah.
you can. But I think as we went through karting, like when I started, we didn't have the covered rear bumpers and all that. And it was like you had.
Dude, when I started, we didn't have nose cones.
Yeah, it's like if you wanted to send someone, you had to like do it really carefully and skillfully. Where I think I don't know, I'm dating myself by saying all this stuff, but like, I think some of it. I don't know if it's good to just wrap bumpers around the cars.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree completely. So you've done the full road to Indy.
Yep.
Explain that for the layman, what the road to Indy is and how that works.
Yeah, so it's basically a development program that goes from the entry league is at the time when I did it, which is how I'll describe it. It was USF 2000, then Pro Mazda, and then Indy Lights. And at that time, again, it was all under one banner, one ownership group.
Right.
And that championship sort of followed IndyCar around. It might have been one race a year that was like its own thing, but for the most part, you were a support series for IndyCar. And the goal essentially is that if you kind of progress through the ranks, you're going to drive faster and faster cars from USF to Pro Mazda to Indy Lights, and just develop your talent and skills and all that as you're going through that league. There's a scholarship program with the series sponsors where if you're the champion, you get a paid ride for the next series. So it's a great opportunity for people to kind of jumpstart their careers from a funding standpoint if they do well.
Yeah, Daryl told me that. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I can't believe I did that. That should be like the slogan under IndyCar or something like that. Like, hey, if you come here and you win the championship, it's a full ride for the full season?
Pretty much. I mean, it's like it's capped at a certain amount, and the way it kind of works is that I never won one of those championships, but like my understanding is that you like the series has an agreement that like we all would sign with our license, right? That would be the like end of year prize money kind of contract. And if you're the championship, let's just say it's $600,000 for Lights. Like the league will basically put out a tender and say like, here's our offer, and then the team it's kind of whichever team will do it for that price.
Right. Right. So you might not end up in the best equipment.
Not necessarily, but I it seems like the good teams will recognize where the talent is and be able to fill up the gaps, because typically people will go like stay in comparable equipment kind of thing.
And do you think there might be like sometimes say that guy has his own funding anyways, he can go and say to a top tier team, okay, the series is going to give you the $600,000. Yeah. You need $700,000. I've got a sponsor that's $100,000. We'll make it.
Yep.
Do a deal.
Yeah,
okay.
that's pretty. Because even for my teammate this year, Kyle Kirkwood, because it also applies from Indy Lights to IndyCar. So Kyle won Lights last year, and he has the Road to Indy money for IndyCar. So I don't know exactly what the amount is, but it's probably 1.2 to 1.5 or so, because it's you're guaranteed Indy and then like 2 or 3 other races.
Okay. So in the final stage, you don't get the full IndyCar season.
Yeah,
you get Indy 500
and 2 road courses. I
think.
But basically that like is what you kind of use to kickstart your budget, and then the team and yourself has to kind of come up with the balance.
Figure it out, right? And you think it's 3 races, right?
Yeah.
You think those 3 races, a ballpark budget is just over $1 million, 1.2.
I mean, and that's a pretty thin budget, but
sure.
that's roughly what the number is. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So as you progress down the road to Indy, the cars get more downforce, more power, closer to an Indy car, right?
Correct. Yeah. The USF 2000 car is basically, or the Indy Pro 2000 car is basically, an F1600 car, but I mean it's a 2-liter engine, but it's an F1600 with little wings and a little tiny diffuser.
Right.
The Indy Pro car is, that it's and now the way it works is because it used to be the Van Diemen and then a Indy Pro and then a Dallara Indy Lights, but now the USF and the Indy Pro car, the actual same tub. It's just a different engine and aero kit that they bolt onto the tub for the lower or the mid class to kind of make it a little cheaper for the teams.
Sure.
So the Indy Pro car just has bigger wings, bigger tires, a little bit more power, and then the Indy Lights car is a whole different tub.
Yep.
The Indy Lights car has an inline 4-cylinder single turbo, I think 450 horsepower.
Okay.
With 50 horsepower push to pass.
So for anyone who's older, is the Formula Atlantic car.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But the thing with the Atlantic cars though is that they were lower horsepower. They only like 350 horsepower or something like that. But they had way more downforce.
Right.
And so they were more like the F3 cars over in Europe, because the F3 cars in Europe are like very mechanically hooked up, ton of downforce, super high grip, but like no power.
Right.
And that's kind of like the Atlantic cars were a little closer to that. Whereas the Lights car is a bit heavier. It's got, a torquey single turbo, which it's only 450 or 500 horsepower with push to pass, but like the tuning isn't spectacular so it's not very drivable. So like you can light the tires up pretty easily.
Interesting.
So it's a bit more like American,
Yeah. Roast the rear tires coming out every corner. Yeah, which I guess do you think is good training for IndyCar or good preparation for IndyCar, or would you rather have a car that instills more confidence?
I think the Lights car is a great training tool for like your car control, because it's one of those cars that like, which I always had a hard time with this because I'm more of a tight like rear end driver, but it's one of those cars that you just have to drive through it being really on edge, and like if you're not catching the slide coming out of the corner, whether it's on power or in like a high speed corner, it's just not fast. So it teaches you good like reaction time and like managing slides and all that. But it's on the Cooper tire, whereas IndyCar is on the Firestone. And the way that the Cooper tire is super hard, it'll peak on lap 4, but then really not drop off during the race. Like your fastest lap in Lights might be the last 3 laps kind of thing, because you burned off some fuel.
Interesting.
Whereas the Firestone is like very peaky, and then whether it's the red or the black, there's still going to be more of a degradation. So you're managing tire wear and tire life, whereas in Lights, you don't have to think about tire life really at all.
Interesting.
So from that perspective, I think, and they just announced like 2 weeks ago that Lights is actually going back to Firestone. So with the Lights car on the Firestone, I think it'll be a better training tool personally.
Right. Yeah, as close as you can get. So you did a whole ton of years in the ladder. At what point did the goal become clear that it was IndyCar along that journey?
Yeah, so for a significant portion of my time in the road to Indy, I was at Queens, going through and engineering and all that, and it was kind of just sort of going in lockstep with like education and racing and kind of what I had done through karting, with the goal to just kind of keep going and keep pushing myself to get better and try to keep moving up. Once I graduated from Queens, I moved down to Indy because I was starting in Indy Lights, and really kind of having a serious go at it. So I'd say once I like in fourth year at school, I kind of had made the decision that I wanted to try giving racing a proper go professionally, and then really put the effort in for those years to try to make it happen. And then probably halfway, because I started out in Lights with Andretti, did 3 years with them and 1 year with Juncos. Probably halfway through, like on year 2 with Andretti, was when some conversations about IndyCar were starting to happen with some teams and all that. And there were some opportunities in the 3rd and 4th year to do races, but never, like the right program never really kind of came up to do a one-off like at the 500 and all that.
Sure.
But that was sort of how the progression went.
Right. Now, I want to get your opinion and spend a little bit of time on like that. Maybe it's not the jump from Indy Lights to IndyCar. Maybe it happens earlier, but the amount of fitness required to drive an IndyCar is like, I don't fully understand it, but I see it, from the outside looking in. Everyone's training so hard. Like these cars have so much downforce, no power steering. Like it must be insane.
I would say the IndyCar is probably the most raw race car that you can drive right now. I mean, this year's Formula One cars have gotten closer to that because they look a little more on edge. But in years past, you would look at an F1 onboard and like, you know, you and I look at it and know it's not easy because they're carrying so much speed through the corners and they're braking so deep.
Yep.
But like the actual steering input is like, you know, like
mellow,
like nice, right?
Yeah.
Whereas you watch an onboard from an IndyCar and you're like, this guy's hanging on for dear life.
Yeah.
And the reason is that there's no power steering, there's no power brakes, so you're fighting the kickback on the wheel. And the tracks that we race on are inherently a little more bumpy and kind of ragged than some of the FIA, you know, smooth tracks.
Yeah.
Even their street circuits look like.
Yeah.
I mean, Miami had some bumps this year, but like for the most part, their street circuits are pretty tame. Whereas like, you go to Nashville last year and you're going over the bridge and like the car's barely touching the ground over seams. And
Yeah, dude, that thing,
just-
it looked
it
like
was
something out
wild.
of Mario Kart.
Yeah, Rainbow Road.
Yeah.
with country music.
Yeah, exactly.
So the just the raw physicality of it is like, I remember my first couple IndyCar races. Like, it is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. So you have to train so hard. And like, I think I was pretty fit when I started, but like I'm definitely fitter now.
Right.
The load in the wheel, like to, you know, somewhere like Barber, where it's very high grip and they recently repaved it. Like we maybe seen, you know, 3.8, maybe 4G peak in a couple of the corners where you have a big compression and a lot of lateral load. But you get to a point where in that race, when you put in new tires, like new Firestone Reds and full tanks, that like once the tires are up to temp and you've burnt a little bit of fuel, so you're kind of at that peak of lap time, you are literally limited by your physical power of like how hard you can turn the wheel. Like that becomes the limiting factor.
Really? That's insane to hear.
Yeah. And the current car is a little bit quicker, I think, than the AeroKit car was, but I did have a chance to drive the AeroKit cars back when Chevy and Honda had their own separate kits, right?
Yeah.
And I drove one at Watkins Glen and one at Road America. And those cars in road course trim were producing like 7,000 pounds of downforce or something absurd, right? And their top speed was a lot slower than like we're going a bit faster now, but we have so much more top speed than those things did.
Yeah.
Like I think that was probably the most grip you could have given a car in a corner and have a human still drive it without power steering.
That's insane. Like, so try and explain to me like what kind of, you know, in like weightlifting terms,
Right.
what kind of like, you know, poundage is required on the steering wheel in that peak lap time.
I would say peak, like somewhere like, so the hardest, so, you know, two examples. So last year, and this year I was kind of ready for it, so I knew it was going to come, but in 2021 at Barber, and it was the first race of the year, and you know it's the first race back after a long off season. Like, it doesn't matter how much you've worked out, how much you've tested, it's always going to be tough. And it's usually St. Pete, which is cardio really hard, but like upper body not terrible.
Okay.
But it was Barber that year because COVID and stuff got mixed around. And I remember the last stint was on Reds, which is a softer, grippier tire. And going into turn one is like, you know, it's a 90-degree corner roughly, but it's downhill. And it's a fifth gear corner. Minimum, your apex speed is to like go 120 miles an hour or something like that. And I remember building the load in the wheel, getting to the apex as I'm going down the hill and everything's loading up. And I get halfway to the apex and like I physically cannot turn the wheel anymore. And I'm like fully straining and like almost feeling like I'm going to pass out. Like I went like lightheaded because I strained so hard. And I just got to a point where I was like, lift. Because I was either don't finish the corner or, you know, like that's like it just locked down, right? And now, and like, so for the rest of that, for the next 5 laps when the tires still had the edge on them, I would basically come off the brakes and just be like just turn it quick and just get it there and like prop my elbow up against the tub and be like, and then, you know, like now this year, knowing that, like definitely focused on a bit more upper body than I had in, you know, 2020 off season.
Right.
But it would be like, you know, imagine you're holding your steering wheel and you've got like an axle, two bearings, or 2 pillow block bearings and a bar. And let's say your bar is like 3 feet, you know, 2.5 feet or so. It would be like putting 40 pounds on that bar, you know, kind of
and
thing.
Holding
and
it.
trying to, like, I can't remember what the actual Newton meter,
Yeah.
like torque value is, but it's high. Like just, you know, like
it's all your effort.
it is like we're, you know, both same size roughly.
Sure.
Like
Yeah.
it is as hard as you could turn the wheel. Like that's what these cars get to.
That's insane. Because like it is, you look at it, you look at every series, and of course, guys in F1 are training hard. Guys in NASCAR either are or aren't. Guys who race dirt cars or whatever, they're just racing 4 times a week, so they're just in race
fit
shape
anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, but IndyCar guys it seems like they're all in Indianapolis. They're all going to Pit Fit. They're all.
I almost wore my Pit Fit shirt today.
They're all doing like just these wild exercises, that look ridiculous.
Yeah.
And they all have big forearms and freaking calloused hands.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, I got all of the blisters, and this was from Detroit, just the kickback in the wheel.
that's insane.
It is. I really think it's the most physical racing series in the world. F1 has higher load on your neck, no doubt.
Sure.
Because they're pulling like 5 Gs or whatever.
Yep.
But even what we're doing, like I've compared the load on your head to like laying off the side of the couch with like a 35-pound plate just
On your head.
resting on your head. Like at Barber, again, it's like and half the effort too is like you're straining to keep your head like vertically set, but also back and forth because you're up and down like this, right?
Yeah.
And then you add in the aero screen, which is new the last few years, and you race closed cockpit cars, so like you have to deal with heat.
Yeah.
But I mean, some of the cockpit temperatures when we're at, if it's 90 degrees ambient, it's probably 120 in the cockpit, right? So the temperature has gotten so crazy. Yeah, it is a physically wild experience.
Why are they so stuck on having no power steering?
I'm personally a fan of it. I think it's a good differentiator.
Yeah. Yeah, like to say either way isn't right or wrong.
Yeah, I really think it's because IndyCar wants to be and kind of is like more of a pure driving formula or experience, whereas Formula One is a pinnacle of technical achievement, and you couldn't if you took the power steering out of a modern Formula One car, you couldn't drive it,
right?
Or you could drive it slow, you could not drive at the pace, like you physically wouldn't be able to. So I kind of think IndyCar is like you're trying to get to that limit of like what can you do without the electronics and the aids and all that, like and not to say our cars aren't sophisticated, like they are, but in a different way. And the only thing that we have that has come up is in IndyCar, the most common injury is probably a wrist or a hand injury, right?
Right.
Because of without having power steering, if you have a wreck, and you don't let go of the wheel, you can like break a finger, snap your wrist, and all that like relatively easily.
Yeah.
So they've tried some prototypes of systems to try to like like a steering rack that would sort of lock up or something like that. But like they haven't been able to make something that's reliable.
That also sounds dangerous.
Yeah.
It's unreliable.
So yeah, I think they've had concepts, and it's been like no one's thought of a good idea to like fix that problem.
Right.
But for me, it's one of those things that I think we're all okay with, because I think we all like the challenge of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It must be so. Anytime you finish a race, it is a feeling of relief, but it must be like times 100 getting out of that thing, being like, I'm finally done.
Get me a Gatorade.
Yeah, especially with the heat. The heat kills me, man. Like the heat is hard. It's like anyone who spends any time in a sauna, you get to around half an hour, 35 minutes, and like that panic sets in. Yeah. And then imagine having to do like weightlifting, mental math, at the same time.
I mean, it's the mental side of it. Like the heat adds a stressor that we didn't have. I mean, it was hot in the car, but it wasn't like insane. Or this is like you're baking, right? Yeah. And you just even like, especially tracks like St. Pete, or like Mid Ohio this weekend, where it's a bit more, bang bang bang. Like somewhere like Road America, there's so much time on the straightaways that it's physical, but it's not like it's upper body physical. It's not that cardio physical. Yeah. Whereas somewhere like St. Pete, it's like you have to remind yourself to like breathe and just stay on top of that, because if you let it start doing that, like you can get to a point where all of a sudden your heart rate's like 175.
And it's freaking tough to get it back down. Yeah. You gotta start holding your breath.
Yeah.
Then it's no good either.
No.
How much? Because I asked you about the steering. In terms of like a leg press,
right?
For the brake pedal, what kind of pressure do you need to put out?
I would say it would be if you loaded up like 120 pounds on a leg press machine and like gave it a good kick, it's probably comparable. Or if you did like a pistol squat, just like the one leg thing or kick your leg out, like that isn't it's more weight than that, but that would give you the dynamic feeling of like, because you have to like load it quickly, right? So it's not like you don't have time to be like, it's like up to max pressure, and then trail it off, and then you're controlling which we break with our left leg, you're controlling the release to get that nice curve as you're trail braking off and kind of trading longitudinal acceleration for lateral acceleration. And that's where a lot of the lap time is, because
in releasing the brake,
and it's the last, like, it's from like 200 psi to 0. There's a lot of lap time there.
You mean in releasing it quickly?
Yes.
Okay.
Because if you're a little bit, and like I would look at data from like me and Kyle, or me and Sab last year, and it would be like 20 psi different. You're like, there's a tenth right there.
Yep.
Just because the brakes are so powerful with the carbon brakes, and you've got these big tires that like even a little bit of pressure really decelerates the car a lot.
Sure.
So a lot of lap time comes from just committing to coming off and just trusting that the aero and the tire grip's going to be there.
Right. So what month are we in now? June. So you probably had a couple races since, but coming out of the month of May, obviously is the big Indy 500 month. Can you explain again to the layman or even the motorsports fan who doesn't realize how big a deal that is just as a sporting event?
Yeah, the Indy 500, I mean, it's the largest single day sporting event in the world, on site this year, over 350,000 people or something like that. It's it's a local thing in Indianapolis and in the Midwest. Like, everyone in their family has some story or some tie-in with the Indy 500, going there with their parents or with their uncle or whatever. And it's also an international event. Like, it's one of those. It's like a FIFA World Cup or a Olympics, or it's one of those sporting events that like you could pool a good number of people and they'll know what the Indy 500 is. So just to have the opportunity to compete in that and just be part of that history is, first of all, just an honor, right? It's a cool thing to be part of, and it's so different than any other race because it's a 2-week event, and like qualifying is its own weekend,
right?
And you build up. It's like you have 5 days of practice in the first week, and 4 of those days are just race prep, and then Fast Friday comes and you start doing qualifying runs, and then you do qualifying weekend, then a couple more practices the week of the race, but also a ton of media stuff and like commitments and all that, and then race weekend. So the day before the race is the day of the parade. It's the 3rd largest parade in America, and they get the whole field gets they all get in pace cars, and it was everyone's got their wives and kids. It was me and Nicole, right? And you go through downtown Indy and back, and it's like for 2 miles there's just like people everywhere. It's the craziest thing you've ever experienced. And then you get to race day, and like we all, like, you have to stay at the track, because if you're a driver, like, and you're not at the track, like, you're not getting in. Like, it's so busy. And you go out like for the pre-race ceremony and all that, and the straightaway is like a mile long, and there's just grandstands everywhere, and it's full. Every seat is full, and pit lane is packed, and you can't get anywhere. There's just so many people. So it's just a wild experience.
Someone asked me this recently. I didn't know what the answer was. When did the Indy 500 first kind of start?
The first year was 1911.
Okay.
So this year was the 106th.
Okay.
And obviously they missed a couple of years. World War II. Yeah. There was like 4 or 5, I think, that were missed. And yeah, 1911. Yeah. So it started out as basically like, bring your car and see if it can run for 500 miles.
Right.
That was the goal.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah. I've never thought about it like that.
Yeah.
Huh. So, man, you had a freaking big wreck.
Yeah.
At Indy. What day was that? That was the Fast Friday before qualifying?
No, that was Monday after qualifying.
Monday after qualifying. Run me through that.
So we get, and just to kind of backtrack a little bit, like Fast Friday, as I kind of said, you sort of slowly trim the car out to get into qualifying trim, and like qualifying at Indy is the scariest thing you've ever done in your life.
Explain to people why.
So when you're in race trim, you can run around the Indianapolis Motor Speedway more or less comfortably, flat out. But for qualifying, they add about 100 horsepower, or 75 or so, and we start trimming with just more boost, and we start trimming the downforce off because the wings on the car and the undertray are, pressing the car down.
Mm-hmm.
So in race trim, you might be running plus 1 degree on the rear wing and a 1/4 inch wicker or something like that, which is a little flap that kind of creates more downforce. When you qualify, your rear wing is up, so you're positive on the rear wing, as in it's like pulling the car off the ground,
an airplane,
like an airplane at this point.
Yeah.
And the thing is, net you still have downforce because the undertray is like producing so much downforce, but you're just trying to free the car up, so you're tilting the wing up and trying to pull the car off the ground to get A, just get drag out of it, and B, free it up mechanically. And it goes from being this kind of comfortable, like solid race car to just this knife edge, super on the limit. Like the car is so balanced in qualifying trim that literally if you could drive beside an Indy car at 230 miles an hour trimmed out for qualifying and press on the rear wing, you could spin it out just by pressing like that. Like your CG and your COP, it's all so close together.
Right.
That, because you have to do 4 laps.
Yep.
And to do that, you have to make the tires last, which means it needs to be pretty free. You can't just be barreling through the corners, scrubbing the fronts off.
Right.
And that's slow.
Right.
So it's it's going to be on edge. The car is going to feel light, and you're turning in flat out at 240 miles an hour going into turn 1 and turn 3. Your min corner speed's 220 miles an hour. You have to be looking at the windsock on every straightaway to see where the wind's at, because that affects like your turning point and whatnot. And then on top of that, what we've started doing is, and this isn't really, it was a secret, but now everyone's doing it. There's been racer articles about it. So with our weight jacker, which is a hydraulic ram that can move crossweight left to right across the front axle, and it basically moves the spring perch on the inside left damper. What we've been doing is programming a fast setting on it so that you actually drop the rear end of the car as much as possible.
Okay.
To like get the rear wing out of the airflow. So you come on the straightaway. So you come at a turn 2, you turn your dial on your weight jacker map setting, press the weight jacker down.
Yeah.
Change the engine switch to it, because you're changing the engine mapping based on the plenum temperature for each lap, kind of thing. So you're changing your engine switch, doing your weight jacker, getting the weight jacker back for the corner, making sure your bars are in the right place, looking at the windsock, making sure you drive the car right and don't miss your turn-in point. To do all this stuff on a race car that is not happy to be,
not stable,
not very stable. So that's why qualifying at Indy is so hard.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what happened with me? We got through qualifying as a team. We kind of struggled overall. It was kind of a just we were down a little bit, but we felt really good about our race car, and had been running great in traffic up until then. And in the practice session on Monday, everyone's doing pack running, working on race setup. And Grosjean, I'm behind Grosjean. He's his first time at Indy, obviously great Formula 1 driver, but.
Sure.
Still kind of learning the oval thing, and all month it was like whenever I remember being around him, it's like it's one of those things where it's like you get a new guy on ovals that hasn't had a big wreck yet, so they're like they're super free and they're just like being real aggressive. It's like it's gonna bite you, man. And he almost knocked the wall down in 4 and then backed out of it. I was like, okay, he's gonna let me by, and I went around the outside into 1 thinking
he'd lift,
and like at turn in I was like pretty far along, and he stuffs it up the inside, and just like, and I just see him there, and my spotter calls inside. I'm like, oh no, this is not gonna.
And
be
you
good.
needed to be on the bottom.
Yeah, because you can't run 2 lanes at Indy. Off the start and restart you can, but
sure,
when you're running around, you're not running the high line there. And it was kind of one of those moments where like someone puts you in a situation where you either try to put the squeeze on them and you both crash, or you try to make it stick on a shitty line and you crash, which is what happened to me. I got high and the rear end came around, and I just remember feeling it spin and be like, oh, here we go. Please don't go in backwards, and kept coming around and hit the outside safer barrier in turn 1. And you watch the replay, it's like the safer barrier probably deflects like 2.5 feet, right?
God, it looked so fast.
Yeah,
on
it was
TV.
a huge, and like the replay looks fast, but like I remember in the moment, like it was like that, the car spun and crashed, but like in the moment, it felt like it took 8 seconds to hit the wall.
One of those slow-mo, like so many times, like, you know, falling on anything. It's like you get this like frame by frame.
Yeah.
Like, oh boy.
And you're just like, how is this going to feel? Is this going to, you know, is it going to hurt? Whatever. And I remember just before hitting the wall, kind of like, being like, you know, doing one of them. And, and you know, it actually didn't even knock the wind out of me. I was cussing Grosjean out on the radio before the car even stopped. So the team knew I was okay at least.
Yeah.
And, you know, it just, the car, so we have accelerometers in the race car and accelerometers in our earpieces for measured acceleration data for concussions and all that. And, you know, they collect that data to then evaluate how effective their impact foam is in the seats and around the cockpit and their side impact structures. So the car registered 110 Gs, which is a humongous crash, right?
Obviously, yeah, insane.
The earpieces only registered 38, which means that the head surround, that like it's a soft pad that's around your helmet, the seat, all of that did its job and actually absorbed so much of that impact.
So it wasn't even a big deal. No injuries.
No, I mean my left foot was pretty sore because I on the ovals I run a little dead pedal just to put my foot up against.
Yeah.
Because you're not using the brake that much, and your foot, you know, like if you're pulling it back off the brake, and
you get sore as shit. Yeah.
So yeah, having a little brace is nice, but my foot smoked that, and it was all like black and blue for a little while. But yeah.
Jeez. So the team decided to fix the car.
Yep.
And how was it going back out for the next session? Like unfazed, or like, man, my life just flashed before my eyes?
You know, I was super confident after the crash. Like, I think I was just kind of pissed, right?
Yeah.
Because I was like, you know, and to be fair, like I was the passing car, so like I bear some responsibility for that. But like,
dude, my John, my crew chief, tells me all the time. He goes, yeah, you're 50% responsible for being out there. So.
Yeah. And, you know, so like but like there was still part of me that was like, this is not going to be how our month is defined. Like I'm going to come back and, you know, race and we're because we had a really good month up until that point.
Right.
But, you know, then I get back in the car and it's like, okay, you know, the first couple laps it was a bit tough. Not, you know, just to like gain that 100% confidence back. And the thing is too, like, the car you use at Indy is a separate car. Like it's the same tub as the other cars, but like the team is like rubbing on that car and prepping it and making sure everything's right for like months before the race.
Right.
So that when you basically, like, you know, it was motor, gearbox, all the suspension, wings, under tray, all got changed, right? So it was a more or less a brand new car. Like it just, you don't have the time to tune on it to get it back in the window. And, you know, they did a great job of getting that car close because we were able to at least get through the race. Like Colton had a similar experience. He went upside down and crashed.
Right.
And had to, you know, new engine and all that. And like they parked him halfway through the race because they
was so bad.
Put the car back together, but it wasn't quite right. And it was like, Indy's one of those places where if the car's out of the window and it's sketchy, like
there's no point.
You cannot hang on,
You're right.
Especially when it's super loose.
Right. Yeah, you're just gonna. Yeah, there's no point.
Yeah.
You're just gonna wreck it. I've been looking at your TikTok, and I cruised through your TikTok, and you're getting a bunch of traction on it.
Yeah.
But what the video I saw was these freaking robot autonomous.
Oh yeah,
cars running laps. It's like it's one of your first posts, like. And you've got what is the dog's name? The robot dog?
What was it? It was Boston Dynamics.
Yeah.
I can't remember what the dog was called. But
it's like Lex Friedman's dog freaking waving the checkered flag at Indy.
Yeah, that was a cool day. So like, you know, and that was probably my first TikTok that had like it didn't go viral. I got like 20,000 views or something, but it like got more traction than like a couple hundred for some videos of my dog and whatever. And there it is. There we go. You know, it was so when I was in university, it was part of the Formula SAE program where students design and build. There it is. Spot. That's what it was called.
Spot the dog.
So I was doing the Formula SAE thing, and that's like this collegiate design program. And this is kind of what this is. Like they have the Indy Lights chassis from Dallara, but they're research teams from universities that are basically making their own self-driving softwares.
Right.
And, using like LiDAR and GPS and inertia, like tracking and all that. So it was really neat to see. I mean, is this ever going to replace like what I do and what you do? No, but like it just was cool.
Yeah, no, it's so impressive that there's freaking robots running around the racetrack. But now you've been doing like these technical videos, as a guy who has an engineering degree, and you can explain some of this stuff probably better than most race car drivers, and you're getting a bunch of traction on TikTok. Do you think this is like there was this like underserved segment of like, is it true race fans who are your audience, who are just hungry, or is it more engineering type guys? Do you know?
I don't have an objective answer for that, because just from the it's not like you fill out a box on your TikTok and say like, what are you, an engineer or whatever. So like I don't have hard numbers to say who is actually following me, but my assumption is it's kind of a bit of both. And I honestly think the technical crowd is like a smaller percentage than just the general race fan. I feel like there's more general race fans, but it's probably general race fans that are already into like tech stuff, right? Like maybe, the type of person that like isn't an engineer but's built their own sim rig, or like that kind of person. Like I feel like
races RC cars or something like that. Yeah,
precisely. I think that's kind of who I'm speaking to.
Yep.
But like my whole goal with this was like, I think there's so much stuff that like we take for granted that's super cool and like really interesting about how race cars work. That it's rare that a race engineer has a big platform and gets out there and and like has access to the casual race fan. Because like, there's some race engineers that have Twitter accounts, but it's mostly like people like me following them.
Sure.
So I just wanted to, and I wasn't sure if it was going to be well received or not, if people were going to be into it, but I just said, you know what? I think this stuff is cool, and I'm kind of passionate about it. Well, I'm obviously passionate about it, and I think people will be interested in it. So I'm just going to try and put it out there and see how it goes. And and it has been pretty well received.
Looking at here, you got these freaking equations that like, dude, I'm not following. I drive a race car.
Well, and I was shocked that like these ones were the ones that surprised me the most. So there's probably like 5 of those, and I've got a few more planned that I'm working on right now that are like sort of mathy, a little bit, like a little bit technical, like more theory. And like they don't get as many views as some of the other ones, but like they still get good views in it. And like that surprised me. I was kind of expecting this to like go nowhere, but people have been really into it, and that's kind of refreshing to see. I think people just, as long as you explain it simply enough that it's like, because even though I've got the formulas, like I've already done that, and I'm just like, here's the end result of what this tells you. Right.
Yeah. As an engineer and a race car driver, like it's so I had Lance Stroll on the podcast, and I asked him how much input he gets in the setup of the car and how much pressure he feels from his engineer to give him feedback for the setup of the car. So I guess I'll start with that. How much control do you have over the setup of the car, and how much is it engineers just looking at the data, the tire temps, everything, going, oh no, we need to change this, and this?
It's a bit of both, to be honest. I think there's, and it depends on where you're at in your career. Like when I was teammates with Sebastian Bourdais last year, he came into the team as like the expert and the kind of known quantity, right? So the engineers were really keen off of his feedback. And I think, if you're a experienced, well-known driver like that, you'll have a lot of, at least in the IndyCar world, you'll have a lot of input. The thing with the IndyCar is that you really can tune it to drive how you want. Like I mentioned earlier, like I'm not a loose is fast type driver. I prefer to have a little bit of understeer kind of built in, and just the security to like barrel the speed in and kind of sort it out on my own. And that's something that you have freedom to do. Like you can do that with this car. You can tune it however you want. And that sword cuts both ways, because if you choose the wrong methodology, you might just not be on like a fast path as far as where you're taking the car.
Right.
But you'll hopefully, between you and the engineers, will recognize that and correct. As far as like, am I telling them what like spring packages and wheel rates to start with? No. Like, well, IndyCar is a bit more iterative than that. Like we might, look at last year's car and think, okay, what worked and what didn't work, and kind of make an adjustment from there. But when we find something that works really well, like for instance, something that we've been working on this year is like tuning the diff, and we've found some stuff on the street circuit setup that like worked really well at St. Pete, that I liked, that maybe Kyle, my teammate, didn't like as much, but it worked well on my car. So, and for my driving style. So that's something that we've kind of continued. So I think that's it. It's like, as you start to work with your engineer more, and you build a rapport and trust, and like your book of changes that you've worked through, you'll start to trust each other to like, for him to have more input from me.
Right. Do you think you require more of an explanation on each change that's made in the car than a guy who couldn't even care less about what the change is? He doesn't even know anything about the car. He just tells his crew chief how it feels. I
guess I'm probably more curious about like the reasoning behind it, but like in the session, no. Like my job in the session, like while I'm in the car and come into pit lane for a change or in a practice session, is to give like what do you need to go faster? Give that that's subjective feedback as a race car driver. And that's something that I've had to learn. That's a role that I've had to learn how to adopt, like, because of my engineering background, because I came out of university, and I think at that time, with where I was at in my development technically, I don't think I had the handle on the technique, as far as what I should have been focusing on from a driving standpoint, to like make as much use of the engineering side. But I was still trying to.
Sure.
And I think I went overboard with like the data and trying to just overthink things a bit.
Right.
And I recognized that like, halfway through in year 2 of lights, let's say, and then backed off that a lot to like just focus on being a driver for a few years.
Right.
And I think now that I've grown and developed, and my technique and craft has gotten better, I'm kind of circling back a bit to like even just doing, not overthinking things, but just doing a bit more detailed prep work but still from focusing on like the driving. Like I'm really looking at the driving data. Like I'm not digging into like frequency response, the dampers and shock pots, and
that's why you
loads.
Have
that's what the engineers are for. But like I'm applying my engineering method or like work ethic to the driving problem.
Right. So you looking at data from previous years and what worked, overlaying it with video and seeing how that bored out. The the biggest tool, like what, I don't know how much you guys don't get a whole lot of testing, do you?
We get like 4 days a year,
right?
5 days a year, yeah.
So to like anyone who raced cars in the 80s or 90s, that's ridiculous.
It's like two months worth of month worth of testing. Yeah, it's nothing.
Yeah. So the big piece of equipment now for drivers to get comfortable on the track and teams to get set up is the simulator. Mm-hmm. How many days a week are you on the simulator?
So last year we were there every couple weeks.
And paint a picture of this freaking simulator for people.
It's
it is
like
insane.
It belongs in the back cave. Like it's now we aren't using the Dallara one, which is the hexapod thing.
Dude, it looks like something like Dr. Octopus.
Oh, it's
type.
wild, yeah. But that one, to be honest, like the Dallara, I don't want to get in trouble, but like the Dallara one's okay, but it's like the motion is almost too much.
Right.
And part of that is because the Chevy and Honda teams have their own dedicated sims that that the teams just go to. So not a lot of people spend time at the Dallara sim, so the model doesn't get developed. So then we go there and we're like, well, the Chevy sim's better, so we're just going to use that.
Right.
It's cool to see. Like I've driven it when it's fully, moving around and all that. But now, to be honest, a lot more of the sims are these sled designs that have, like the whole thing will translate and yaw and pitch and all that, but it's not on a hexapod. It's on like imagine like a CNC mill, right?
Okay.
Like lead screws and all that. It's just quicker response. Because the big ones are like, it's great for like a flight simulator,
sure,
where the rates are a little bit slower,
right?
But in a race car, stuff's happening super quick and bumps and all that. So these sled designs work actually. They feel more realistic. But I mean the Chevy one is still like, it's a 2-story room with this humongous sled with like a race car on it,
Yeah.
and like wraparound screens, and
Like
you know,
insane.
like the sound system is bonkers, right? It's like a rock concert. You know, it sounds like the real race car and all that.
And
it's-
do you guys have like heat and stuff? And
no, we don't have that.
Okay.
But we've got the aero screen, like to, you know, for the visual and everything, and like the force feedback in the Chevy IndyCar sim is the best force feedback I have ever felt in a simulator. Like it's effort wise like driving the real car.
Really?
Yeah.
So I just built a sim, and it's insane. I've got, what is it, the Sim Cube 2 or whatever,
Yep.
like a decent one,
Mm-hmm.
and the force feedback is like 10 times what it is in the
Yeah, you
in
can
the
crank it up
Canadian
like crazy.
NASCAR with the power steering. It's like my dad got on it and he's like, "What the heck is this? What are we driving, an IndyCar here?" But it's great, man. Like the sim is incredible. Like, you know, I've talked with Daryl about this all the time, just like how fast kids can get on the sim,
Yeah.
and then just hop into a race car, and it doesn't take them that long to be up to speed. And people developing their whole like childhood on the sim.
I know. Yeah.
And the time now is, it's unlimited.
Yeah.
It's unlimited. A kid can be on a sim for 12 hours a day, every day, and like she's just done his 10,000 hours, plain and simple.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, again, I'm dating myself and a little old school, right? But like, I think there's a value to them, and I think like for me, I would use a sim when I don't know a track.
Okay.
If it's not the Chevy like super duper sim, right? If it's just like a home sim, I'm gonna be using that to like learn tracks that I don't know, or to in the off season like stay sharp with racecraft, like go on iRacing and race against real humans, right? Like I think that's where I find the value out of it. But like and maybe it's because the IndyCar model on iRacing just isn't up to what it needs to be like a useful training tool for me. But like I can't hop on iRacing and get a whole lot out of like practicing.
Right.
You know, I can work on muscle memory of like a specific technique thing if like I know, okay, I need to work on like being a little, you know, smoother on my initial throttle tip in or something like that. Like I can train that on the sim, but I'm not going to like become a better IndyCar driver by pounding laps on the iRacing model.
Okay.
And you know, but when you're younger and you're coming up the you know, on that progression, that might be a different story because you're learning the stuff. Whereas I've been through that and learned like the basic technique of driving a car.
Right.
But like I said, I think they're a great tool, but for where I'm at, it's more like staying sharp with like racing stuff, I think.
Do you have can you get me the Toronto Indy road course?
I wish.
Do you guys not have it?
It's not, well, yeah, we have it on the Chevy one.
Okay.
But not on iRacing or any of the.
So you can't just stick a USB stick in there.
I mean, you would have to, because it's like the way those ones work is they use like R Factor Pro, but they like really it's just like a graphics engine.
Okay.
So they're building their own car models and engine models and vehicle dynamics models, like just using that as like what you see on screen kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, we have like we had Nashville before we ever drove at Nashville.
Really?
Which was the best thing ever. Like I showed up to Nashville knowing roughly where my brake points were, like all the corner gears, the flow of the track, like, and like that's where I think sims are super useful. Like if it's track you haven't been to and like learning the flow of it, I think there's a lot of value to that. But like, to be honest, of the older generation of IndyCar guys, like there's only a handful that really use per home sims a lot. Like guys like Dixon and Rossi don't really use sims at all.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, I guess after you're doing it for so long, it is fundamentally different. Like the feel and everything.
And just like the pace of what we're like, you know, we're coming out, we're going into like back to back weekends, right? So like you're in the car so much that it just kind of, you don't maybe need it as much. Right. But like then that's where for me, like I'll use it more during the off season than I would like in season, you know?
Right. Have you felt this year, or maybe this is IndyCar's really first year out of COVID, right?
Yep.
Kind of like full proper year. Have you felt or noticed the Drive to Survive effect on the IndyCar series? As far as like Drive to Survive is so freaking popular in Netflix that, you know, it's blown up Formula One.
Yeah.
And has there been like a knock-on effect, you think, for all other motorsports?
I think so. I think it's a bit of a, rising tide lifts all boats kind of thing. But to be frank, I think we probably could have capitalized on that earlier than I think we're starting to. But because once Drive to Survive dropped, right, and blew up, right, like that, if you had have done something similar right then, it would have been like a competitive product. But like now, 4 or 5 years down the line, like we can't copy Drive to Survive, right?
Sure.
So if we're going to do like an IndyCar dock thing, it'll have to be a bit of a different take than how Drive to Survive works.
Right.
But yeah, I think in general, like the overall appetite and sort of landscape for racing has changed. Like people are more into racing than they were, 10 years ago, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's shifting, like where NASCAR is versus IndyCar and F1.
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, you see guys like Michael Jordan and Pitbull becoming team owners in NASCAR, and it's becoming more and more mainstream and more and more popular. Like, these with Drive to Survive, it's made that whole group of guys on the grid like real proper celebrities now, where people are like really paying attention, and you see guys like Hamilton and Vettel now becoming kind of public figures and tweeting out social and political statements.
Right.
You've started to do that recently on Twitter. How is that received?
I mean, I think, it was, so that article kind of centered around the reaction to the stuff that I put out after Uvalde, obviously that tragedy with yet another school shooting down in the States. And, what started it was, kicked it off is that I tweeted out my opinions about kind of sensible gun laws in Canada versus the States, and like what I feel would be a sensible way for the U.S. to go. It was actually more well received than I expected, and it was one of those things. I remember like that day when that happened, we were at Nicole's work, and she's working in pediatrics now, and so me and my teammates, we'd organized this with Nicole and her boss, and basically like a kind of school visit, or a hospital visit with her facility where they got all their kids out, and then gave flyers out to the parents saying, hey, come on, Thursday before the 500, and we'll have IndyCar drivers and take pictures and play games and do all this for the kids that are getting care at her facility. And we're there, and then I see on my phone like the notification of this whole thing. So it really just hit kind of hard that day, and like because I think up until sort of partway through this year, like I'd kind of done the typical race car driver thing of like just totally avoiding all of that,
right?
Because that's kind of the safer thing to do. But it got to this point where I was like, hey, I'm getting older, and I don't care as much about what people think.
Sure.
And it, some of the stuff that's been happening lately, it's like I knew in my mind that I would look back on this time in my life when I have this platform, and probably regret it if I didn't feel like I did something.
Okay.
So that was kind of what drove me to do that, and then obviously not wanting to just like be tweeting stuff out and not actually doing something. Like we raised over $11,000 that was donated to those families, and that the action or the statements followed by the action, I think, are kind of an important thing.
I think that's very important. I think anyone can say whatever on Twitter, but to the way you are in the world is action. The old trope is like actions speak volumes.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think what really was, I mean, obviously there's nothing positive about anything about that situation, but something that was, I guess, refreshing was that you can guarantee that not everyone that donated to that fund that we were helping raise money for, like through our program, agrees with what I had to say. Right?
Sure.
Like, just based on like the demographics in the U.S. and how opinions on gun laws are divided, like statistically, it's just not possible. But still, the IndyCar community kind of got together and donated money and helped these families out, and I felt like that was, a positive out of that. I think my goal with being a bit more vocal about stuff is just like, in my personal life, it's like we've been friends for a long time. Like I kind of expect the people that I associate myself with to, like, if we're good friends, to be able to like have discussions about difficult topics and like not necessarily agree. Like we're not going to agree on everything, but we can still talk through stuff and share ideas, and hopefully, if we're both sort of effective in debating a topic or presenting what our opinions are, like we can learn something together kind of thing. And I think, if anything positive is going to come out of just like tweeting your opinions, it's trying to do it in like a rational, sort of respectful way to engage in a debate in a non-vitriolic, not just like talking points of the left or the right or whatever. So that's what I've been trying to do. And it's been, relatively well received. I think a lot, with the stuff recently with the Supreme Court and Roe v. Wade and the abortion discussion in the States, like a lot more of the yahoos came out of the woodwork on that one, and just saying like just horrible things that weren't respectful anyway, even in like regular conversation.
Or don't disagree.
Yeah. So like that you're gonna get that no matter what. But I think with stuff like that, it's I'm like I said, I'm just at a point where I feel strongly enough to sort of support or fight for what I believe in, and I think,
or at least discuss it.
Yeah,
it
doesn't have to be a fight always, right?
Yeah, and I think it's so important. Like what you just said there is awesome. Like it's so important to be able to, because you're not going to change someone's mind by calling them an idiot or a bad person.
No.
It has to be through a debate and through actually, convincing arguments.
Yeah. Well, and like I'm a like to a fault, like a rational like person, and and that's how I approach a lot of problems. But I just think sometimes it's like that's the framework that I use to think about a lot of issues, and I think the beauty of that is that when your rationality kind of shows you that when you realize that you are wrong, like you don't have to feel bad about it because it's a rational argument. It's not like an emotional thing that you can't justify. Like your x plus whatever equals something else. Like it's it takes the emotion out of it a little bit, which is that's how I try to approach difficult topics.
Yeah, it's so tough. Like that we'd like to think that we can be perfectly like that, and of course change our mind when we're wrong. And
it still stings when you realize you're wrong, though.
Right. But yeah, that's such a good muscle to flex is not, or to train is you're not defined by your what you believe. Those beliefs should change.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know if you like do much or if you follow much in the investing and like financial world and all that, but like
no, not really.
There's a famous group of investors, and one of them is Charlie Munger, who's a sort of Warren Buffett's right hand man kind of thing. And one of his things is like he's been quoted saying like one of his favorite things to do is to like dismantle his own ideas or his own prejudices. And I think that's a really powerful and like intelligent way to approach life. Like if you shouldn't just rest on your laurels and assume because you intuitively believe something that it's true. Like you should if you have an idea and you think, okay, this is something I want to put out in the world, you should try to invert the argument and poke holes in it, and that's going to probably tell you something about it.
Yeah, and I think especially in those two debates there is to really see how with being born a different person in a different place, you could be that person that you're arguing with on the internet.
For sure.
Like that can be you as well. And, there's super smart people on all sides of the debate. And I think the problem is with a lot of those debates is that they're framed in a binary. And 99.99% of people are in the gray somewhere in between on both the abortion debate and the gun debate. Very few people are on either extreme. So, now it's a nuanced discussion.
Yeah, and it's like, and that's even with back to the gun debate thing when people were, because I put out my opinions basically saying that like I think it's crazy that the ease of access to some of these high power weapons and all that in the States, having as a Canadian gone through my restricted and non-restricted PA courses and like
as a gun owner
as a gun owner in Canada, not approaching it as someone who's never been around this stuff. Like I grew up hunting, grew up around all this stuff, have fired many different types of firearms throughout my life, and been around that. Like the only thing I was saying is that I think there should be more training, and like it shouldn't, and like Yahoo shouldn't be able to get this stuff. Like, there should be a process, and and I'm not out there saying like ban all guns and get rid of all that, because it's a state. It's never going to happen. It's just not a rational thing to say. Yeah. And like they're already out there, so like you're not going to, but what are you going to do with the hundreds of millions of guns that are already in people's possessions, right? So I think with the stuff last week with Roe v. Wade, like I try, and there were a good number of people that were trying to have like an intelligent debate about it. There were, of course, like people just trolling and being stupid, but like the ones that were trying to engage, and like I think someone asked, they were like not trying to troll, but like, this is my perspective, like what do you think about that? I remember trying to explain that, like, even like I sort of laid out like the reasons and the qualifying reasons why I think I'm pro-choice and why I'm arguing for that, not not making it a binary discussion. I think that happens too often, where it's like, it's the whole thing is like, is it a when is it like when is it when is it a person or not, or when is it defined life, and like setting a binary sort of qualifier for a very nuanced, very difficult, murky subject is it's like they're trying to oversimplify a complicated issue to like talking points.
Exactly.
It's not the right way to do things.
Yeah, no, I completely agree on both of those. Yeah. The article that, talks about you being now, tweeting on social issues and political issues compares you to Hamilton and Vettel. How do you feel about being compared to Hamilton and Vettel? Not in a racing sense, but in a outspoken sense.
Yeah, I think I should win a few more races or win a race in IndyCar before we even start going there. When I saw it was okay, yeah, you've got to have a catchy headline, but like, I thought they were a bit, it's like, we don't need to make my head bigger than it needs to be, right? And because what I said in the interview was that, to kind of clarify that, like I told the guy when he was interviewing me, was that part of what sort of emboldened me to do this was looking at what Vettel was doing. Sure. Not comparing myself to him, but just seeing him as an example of like, here's someone that's kind of standing up for what they believe in and being more inspired by, as opposed to like saying, oh, I'm IndyCar Sebastian Vettel. That's not what I was saying.
Yeah. So I ask every racer on the podcast this question. And I stole it. I have to keep saying that I stole it from Dale Jr.'s podcast. But he has a segment where he talks about ingenuity. Okay. Within the rule book. Cheating. Yeah. To put it bluntly. Do you have any good cheating stories from IndyCar that you may have just heard of? You heard about this story.
I mean, I've definitely heard of some stuff that from back in the day. I mean, I think that was... Because I think like 30, 40 years ago, like when AJ was in his heyday, like it was a different time, right? Because there was, I think back then, there just was more gray area than there is now, and like the tech scrutineering was way less advanced. Like we have, a whole like IndyCar has like $1 million setup pad with all these like laser measurement devices and stuff. It's like there's no wiggle room now, right? But back in the day, like people would do stuff like I from back in the day at Indy, I've heard of drivers having like, put in like not nitromethane, but like some kind of accelerant in their drink bottle, and then having like taking that out of their helmet and putting that into the air intake on the straightaway, like stuff like that. It's like 40 years ago, right? Yeah. So here's one that's contemporary and potentially still relevant. They'll check your brakes for qualifying at Indy because you're flat out and you don't use the brakes, right? So like you'll have knockback springs to pull the pads back, which means you have to like kind of pump them up to get them to the pads to actually bite, which is terrifying if you think about it, what you're actually doing.
Yes, it is.
But what they'll do, sometimes you'll be in the line for qualifying because we go out one car at a time. So the marshal will say brakes or whatever, and it'll like rock your tire. So like they have to know that the brakes are actually working. Okay.
Why? Because guys will take brakes off, components off.
Am I gonna get in trouble for saying that?
No, we can edit it out.
No, this is fine. I mean, like I said, this is a freebie for anyone listening. So what people have done is buy. Do you have a computer mouse kicking around?
No, just use that. Or
Well, no. So the little Teflon sliders that go on the bottom of a computer mouse.
Okay, the sliders.
The sliders.
Yep.
So like buy 50 of those off of Amazon or something.
Okay.
And stick those on your brake pads.
Okay.
And then in pit lane, you'll clamp the brakes.
Sure.
And that'll hold the disc
Yep.
while he rocks the tire. But on track, the Teflon slider kind of reduces the friction between the brake pad and the disc if it touches it at all.
Okay.
And then when you get in pit lane after your run, you just stand on the brakes and it burns them up.
Interesting.
So they aren't there anymore.
So what is that for? So when the pads are wiggling around,
Yeah,
they
just
might
those little
touch.
contacts aren't going to cause any drag.
So it's not for weight or anything.
No, and we're talking hundredths of a second that something like that might do. But
It all adds up.
that's something that I've heard about.
So they're doing other stuff too. If they're only spending that much time to do that. Huh. Do you think? Like I asked Stroll this question in Formula One. Like in NASCAR, being in the gray area, getting around the rules, or finding a loophole in the rule book is so celebrated.
Right.
It ain't cheating if you don't get caught.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there's that mentality in the IndyCar pit? Amongst old school crew chiefs, maybe, or
maybe. I mean, I think like, the head crew chief that we have at Foyt, Grant Weaver, he is, he's worked at Ganassi, and he ran the Ford
Corvette racing.
No, not the Corvette. Was it the Corvette? No, yeah, it was the Chevy. Because I was seeing the Ford GT, but it was he was running the Chevy endurance team.
Okay.
In IMSA for a while, and his whole thing is that like that we're absolutely not going to be cheating or doing it and anything like that, and that's kind of where I'm at. Like I'm not, I think if you like in a series where you're open development like F1 or not open, but like where you're designing your own car and you find like the what was the F duct thing, right? Or like the push pull steering wheel they had on the McLaren car. That to me isn't cheating as much as it is like
innovation.
Like I'm all on board for that, but like I'm not into like finding 2/10 by like just messing with something that like
moving the transponder.
Yeah, it's like that's not the point, right?
Right.
So I would say most, like probably 95% of people are like that in the IndyCar world. Because really where it's there's like the areas being a spec series, the areas that are open development are so tight. And for us, it's the dampers and a bit of like how you do your brake system and all that.
Yep.
Not the mouse pad thing, but everything else. The brakes are also a bit of an open development thing that like you spend so much effort and money trying to get your dampers right and all that like that's where you're if you have spare engineering talent, it's going to that. It's not going to cheating.
Right. It's just trying to make everything work well. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's so often guys are trying to find these, trying to be a hero, but it's like, man, just work on the car and make it better.
That's the thing, right? It's like there's no secret. Well, I mean, there's secret sauce, but there's no magic bullet, right? Like, why are Penske and Ganassi excellent teams?
Yeah, because
they do everything 5 to 8% better than everyone else. That's it. That's the entire advantage. It's not like, because like they're not finding 2 miles an hour at Indy qualifying in just their bearings.
Right.
It's the bearings, it's the gearbox, it's the body work, it's the prep, it's the fit and finish, it's everything.
The massaging.
Yeah, and that's the heart. That's the reality. It's not the sexy like, back in the day, like dumping some nitro in your air intake. It's like you just have to do everything a little bit better.
Right. Yeah, that is. It really is. There's no sexy fix to just having a hot rod with a cheater carb anymore.
No.
Yeah.
And like nowadays too, like the series is monitoring your boost levels and all. Like we'll get a penalty because the each car has their own power plant engineer through Chevy or Honda, and you'll get a penalty if your car, like there's an electronic box on the car, it's like a scrutineering box that measures the boost level, and if you overboost, like it'll cut your power for like you'll get like a soft limiter for like 2 seconds.
Really?
So like even during the session, like if your shift cuts aren't right and you overboost for a split second, like you'll get a detriment on track.
Huh.
So you can't like cheat the power or anything like that.
Interesting. So do you think IndyCar is like pretty high up there as far as spec series goes?
I mean, I'm almost. I mean, it's a spec series by definition, but like it's being in it. It's hard for me to look at it as a spec series because the setups matter so much, and the dampers are totally open development, so you can do whatever you want with your shock absorbers, and that's a lot of mechanical grip. But yeah, if we're going to be strict to the definition of like everyone's running the same car, so it's a spec chassis, it's I guess the premier spec league.
Right. You've been racing, I don't know if it was last year as well, but you've been racing wheel to wheel with Jimmie Johnson a little bit.
Yeah.
I guess to back that up, like what was it like getting to IndyCar and kind of racing with, I'm sure, some of your heroes or guys you looked up to? Did you have a hero growing up in racing, or or at least looked up to any of those guys?
I mean, I think like when I was a kid, like I was always a huge Raikkonen fan.
Okay.
Watching F1 back in the day, like I was a bit too old for Greg Moore, right? Was kind of, I mean,
you were a bit too young.
Yeah. Or young. Sorry. Yeah. Like I got into racing after he passed away, so it just wasn't.
Yeah.
Like it didn't, So from a Canadian perspective, like going coming up through the karting ranks kind of around the time you did, like Hinch and Robbie were never like my heroes, right? But they were guys that I looked up to for sure.
Sure.
And just especially Hinch, just going kind of on the same path as going through the, he did a bit of lights and all that. He did more of the Atlantic stuff, but like as a Canadian going to IndyCar, like I was looking at what he did from his career standpoint, and just he was one of the first guys to really capitalize on the social media stuff and do a really good job there. So, they were a great example, I think. But I've never really been like a hero type guy,
same with me. Yeah.
But it was still like, I remember my first few races being like that's Scott Dixon right there on track, or like Tony Kanaan and stuff like that. Like it was cool for sure. It was definitely like, it wasn't lost on me that these were are some of the biggest names in open wheel racing. It was like, this is pretty neat.
Right. What are your thoughts on, like, man, Jimmie's 7-time NASCAR Cup champion, 46 years old, coming into IndyCar? Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, my opinion is, man, I don't care who you are, how good you are, to go jump into a different series is going to be hard.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you take frickin' Max Verstappen, he's not going to win the Worlds in a shifter kart race.
No.
Yeah. Like,
no, for sure. I think, I mean, I really commend Jimmie for having, the balls to just say, hey, I'm going to check my ego at the door and do something that I know I'm probably going to struggle at for a while.
Yeah.
Just because I want to do it and have fun doing it. So I'm I think that's pretty much the prevailing opinion, like within IndyCar. Like we're all pretty, we're all really supportive of him being involved. And I think selfishly it just shows like how competitive and difficult this series is, right? Because you are taking someone with that level of experience, and it's not as simple as like just plug and play.
Yeah. And
even for Grosjean and Ericsson, it took Ericsson a few years to get his first win in IndyCar, coming from Formula One, and kind of a similar situation for Roman. So it just shows that the level of competition is extremely high.
Yeah. What do you think the kind of peak? I don't want to say peak. Peak before the fall off as far as age goes for IndyCar as a driver. Like, to me, in my mind, 46 is getting up there for IndyCar. Maybe in NASCAR you can be older, maybe you can be 50 and still win races, but
I mean, I think you have the people that are doing that, like your Castronevas, Jimmie Johnson, Tony. I mean, Tony's only doing a handful of races, but Dixon, I mean, he's 41, I think.
Right.
They are total outliers physically, right? Like they are supreme athletes, and they work really hard to maintain that level of fitness. I mean, you can only do that for so long, for sure. But like Scott is, and again, he's a little bit younger, but he's one of the fittest guys on the field by far.
Yeah.
And Jimmie's no slouch either.
No.
So I think that's probably more critical than the age. But I think as you get up there, right? It's like you just have to work harder and be more diligent in like what you eat, and like I don't think Jimmie's going on a bender or like
No, I don't think so. I don't think he was doing
I don't
that.
think anybody is anyway really in the IndyCar. You just can't. Like, you just it's not like James Hunt 80s 70s partying. Like no one's doing that.
No, because that was when no one was training, right? So it was kind of equal footing. So
exactly. Yeah.
He was just better at drinking than everyone else.
And like sure we'll have like after St. Pete there's always like an after party or whatever, but it's like it's not what it was back in the day.
Is anyone getting hammered at the after party?
Yeah, it's people are having a good time for sure.
Yeah.
We were there pretty, and well, this year was kind of special because it was sort of Seb's like retirement party.
Okay.
So that was like and it was like all of his crew from like Newman Haas came and all that. So it was a special event because like normally it's like you go for a few drinks and then you got to catch a flight early in the morning and you're out. But being that event for Seb, everyone kind of turned up and had a good time, and we were there singing karaoke till early in the morning, and it was a fun one for sure.
Who was the best karaoke singer?
Not me.
No, I know that.
We had Nicole and some of our friends came, and bunch of the girls were. So what's that? Is it Cardi B, the WAP song?
Oh,
they were going all out.
I don't want to hear that.
Yeah, it was. I have videos that'll maybe play at the wedding or something.
That's good. That's good. When you get too old for IndyCar, whenever that may be, what? Or whenever, or if your desires ever change and you don't want to race anymore, IndyCar, what series would you look to? Would you look to something else that is maybe catching your eye a little bit that looks fun?
I would say IMSA. Yeah. I've kind of. I mean, I have a. So my dad gave me this Submariner when Nicole and I got engaged. He bought it in like 2003.
Oh, cool.
And was kind of hanging on to it for like a special occasion. So that was.
Wow.
What that was, right?
Very nice, yeah.
Like when he gave it to me, it still had all the plastic wrapping on it, and so it had been sitting in a box and it's safe for like 20 years.
For anyone who doesn't know what a Submariner is, including myself, until Dalton showed me, it's a Rolex, I assume.
Yeah. But so the Daytona 24 is like you get a Rolex Daytona if you win. So I've like kind of said to myself that like I'm never buying a Rolex Daytona.
That's so funny you say that.
I'm either gonna win it or I'm never having one.
Exactly. That's what I said a long time ago. I said I want a Rolex only because I want to win one.
Yeah.
I wouldn't wear it, but yeah.
So that's that. I mean, I would love to do IMSA down the line, but like I think for me, the end goal has always been the open wheel stuff, and that's where my passion's at. Like, if and when I'm out of IndyCar, like I don't necessarily see a secondary career in like IMSA to do that as my like to be racing that professionally full time. I think I would like to still do some of the big races and stuff. Would be fun. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm at with that. I think the IMSA stuff's super fun. I did T Le Mans, Mosport, and Laguna in 2019 in the LMP2 car. Yep. And it's just great racing. Yep. It's all the different classes on track and world-class drivers and great tracks, and it just, you can rub a little more than you can in the open wheel cars, and I really enjoyed it. So that would be something I would consider coming back and doing.
Cool. So what would you do as a secondary career kind of in your latter half of life? What do you see yourself doing? Do you have ideas? You're a smart guy. You think about these things.
I've joked with Nicole that I'm gonna stop racing IndyCar and apply to the CSA for be an astronaut.
You could do it.
Two stressful jobs in a row, right?
Yeah.
But to be honest, I was a little bit joking, but that would be a very cool career path. But I honestly think like. This is a stage in my life where I'm really hyper focused on like my craft and like what I'm doing, and that is fulfilling in of itself. But in my next stage, I want to be kind of building something that's a bit bigger than me and trying to work towards like building more of not like a legacy, but like something that's built. Feel like I'm building more of an organization kind of thing. And obviously, K-Line, the family business, would be somewhere that I would want to end up and just see that company grow and kind of either within its own industry or whatever the next thing is, like see contribute to that legacy would be is kind of where my head's at now. That's where I'm looking towards. It's a great business. It's a really interesting industry that they work in, and I think the part part of the gratifying part about that is, it's a large or medium-sized company that it employs a lot of people. So as you're growing that, like, you're helping those families make their living and, can contribute into the the town and the economy of the area that you're in. So I think that would be really satisfying. It'd be really hard to walk away from the racing world for sure, because it's just what I've done for so long. That being said, who knows, maybe a team or something like that would be in the cards in the future.
Sure.
I would, and again, from the idea of like building something, like if you don't win the 500 as a driver, to build a team that goes and does that and like put the pieces together and get the right people and manage it the right way, like that would be really compelling and a really interesting exercise. So that's what I've been thinking about. I mean, again, it's here and now. I'm focused on competition and just being the best race car driver that I can be. But I'm 28, right? Turned 29 this year, so I'm at the point where I'm certainly thinking about that kind of stuff. Nicole and I are getting married and all that, so I've never wanted to be like a Dixon or a Kanan type that's doing this until I'm like 40. That's just not. I've always wanted to have that second career. And, like I said, I'm getting to the age where that's closer than it is farther away.
Sure.
Whether it's in the immediate future or not isn't it's not like a here and now thing, right?
Right.
But it's on the horizon for sure.
Right. Yeah, I mean, like, all those things sound great. To build a team would be almost equally as gratifying as winning really a race. Neat. What do you think the peak age is, though? Like, I don't want you to
Oh, sorry, we forgot that.
No,
question.
No, not that. I mean, because I phrased that one wrong. I think that peak performance for a race car driver is like between 29 and 32, 33.
Okay.
Do you think it's younger than that?
I mean, Verstappen. How like 19?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, he's like, what, 25 now? I mean, no, but like, I think it depends on the person, to be totally. I think for me, I'm probably more on that side of things, just because I've become a better race car driver for sure in the last few years, and I think I'm just getting to the point now where I'm like really able to kind of consolidate those gains and like perfect that craft and become better, and consciously knowing why I am becoming better. Like, I'm in that phase of my career now, where it's a bit more of a cerebral thing than just driving, right? But I think for me, it would probably be, it's like the now to early 30s, I feel like is the prime for someone that started when I did.
Sure.
And, if I had have got into IndyCar 3 years earlier, maybe it would have been a little bit, or maybe it would have been now, but I didn't get into IndyCar until 2020, so that is what it is.
Yeah.
IndyCar is a super physical and abusive sport, right? So it's if you want to be doing it past your physical prime, you have to like work real hard at it. But like I said, we mentioned pit fit earlier. Like, we do a lot of training. I was doing some intervals yesterday. Didn't have time to do like a full interval workout, but I did like a 12-minute run kind of fitness test, and I did 2 miles, and it's like a 5:50 pace or something.
That's fast.
So decently quick.
Yeah, dude. Remember? So we were doing that Pro-Am race. I was racing with Bobby Labonte in the Pro-Am, and you were like, "Hey, I'm going for a bicycle ride in Indy. You should bring your bike down and go on a ride." I'm like, "Okay." I'm a cyclist now, but this is like 4 years ago. Having never really ridden a bike on a bike ride, I grabbed my dad's bike, come on this ride. Dude, I was barely hanging on for this stupid ride. I couldn't walk. You dropped me off at the hotel, and I walked over, like, in my shorts. I walked over to the like Sam's Clubs or Costco or something, and I bought a full case of protein drinks and just drank them on the floor in the hotel room and stretched. I'm like, I'm not gonna be able to walk tomorrow if I don't recover. It was insane.
Yeah, and man, my bike is on
the pit ride.
Yeah, it's still on the trainer this year. We've been so busy. I haven't been riding a ton this year, but like we do a lot of cycling, and like, man, Scott and Tony Kanan is a machine on the bike. Like I've had that experience riding with him and his buddies.
Yep.
And like, cause like he's like I think he's a cyclist that races cars. Right? He's all out.
Yeah.
But I've gone on rides with him, and like him and his friends are all like pro-am racers, right? And they're like their FTP is like 320 or something.
Jesus,
like they're just insane. But yeah, that's like a good bike ride will wipe you out for sure.
Yeah.
And you've been doing more of the gravel stuff lately, right?
Yeah. No, and it's just where I live, and I don't want to buck up and buy a nice road bike. Yeah. But yeah. Man, we should go for a beer and dinner.
Yeah, let's do it.
Thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it. We'll do it again. When should we do it? Maybe after you're married.
There you go.
Next season.
Yeah. After I'm married, before kids.
Yes.
There you go.
Yeah, we'll do it again. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed the podcast, give it a like and share it with some friends. See you guys next week.